My boss fired me in front of the entire office for being 5 minutes late. "Pack your desk before lunch," he said, then walked into the biggest client presentation of the year. I packed exactly what belonged to me. 10 minutes later, he came running back out. At 9:58 a.m., every terminal wired into the Kessler vault went black at the exact same moment, and the message that replaced them read, "Access suspended. Primary custodian offboarded." Nobody in that glass conference room understood yet what those 4 words meant. I did. I was 2 floors down, standing in the lobby with a cardboard box balanced on my hip and a lanyard clipped to my own keychain instead of left on my desk, exactly where I'd been told to leave it. None of that would matter for another 10 minutes. What mattered right then was 6 hours earlier, and a ticket nobody at Corbin and Wexler had bothered to read in 11 weeks, the one that was about to take the whole building apart, one locked screen at a time. I'd been a security contractor for Corbin and Wexler Capital Partners for almost 3 years by the time any of this happened, which is long enough that people stop treating you like a vendor and start treating you like furniture. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to make friends with the wealth management floor. I was there because somebody has to be the person who understands what happens when $100 million in client assets lives behind a login screen, and that somebody is rarely popular. My actual title was IT security contractor, custodial access, a boring way of saying I held the keys, literally in one case, to the encrypted vaults where the firm's biggest institutional clients stored their financial models, trading algorithms, and account credentials. The biggest of those clients was the Kessler Group, a Zurich-based asset manager that had signed a $4.2 million annual services contract with our New York office 18 months earlier. Kessler's entire relationship with us ran through a single encrypted vault, and that vault had exactly one physical hardware key, a YubiKey stamped Vault Kessler 07 sitting on my actual keychain, reimbursed to me on invoice 3031 when the Kessler account was first set up, the same way you'd reimburse a laptop bag. I didn't design it that way. I inherited a system with a single point of failure and spent most of a year trying to get someone to fix it. I'd been renting a walk-up in Astoria with my dog, Baxter, a 50-pound mutt with one ear that never stood upright, and most mornings looked the same. Coffee from the cart outside the station, the 7 train, a chipped mug on my desk that said, "World's okayest hacker," that a former coworker had given me as a joke gift. My downstairs neighbor's terrier lost its mind every time the mail carrier came, which was how I knew what time it was most mornings without checking my phone. I liked the rhythm of it. I liked that nobody on the trading floor could tell you what a hardware security module was, but they all knew my name because I was the person you called when something wouldn't unlock. The one person on the floor I actually trusted was Noor Iqbal, another contractor who handled endpoint security 2 desks over and had a running bit where she'd rate every new corporate policy on a scale of 1 to actively insane. Noor was the one who'd talked me through filing my first ticket properly, back when I still thought the process mattered more than the paper trail. She kept a running list, mostly for her own sanity, of every security recommendation leadership had shelved for budget reasons. By the time any of this happened, that list had 41 entries. Ticket number 187 would eventually become number 42. Owen Vance was the regional director who ran our floor, and if you'd met him at a conference, you'd have thought he was exactly what a regional director should look like. Expensive suits, a LinkedIn presence built entirely around words like lean and decisive, a habit of ending sentences with "at the end of the day," like it settled something. He kept a small dry erase board behind his desk with that quarter's target numbers written on it in blue marker, and he updated it himself by hand every Monday morning before anyone else got in. What you wouldn't have known, unless you sat 2 cubicles from finance the way I did, was that Owen's entire compensation structure ran on a single number on that board, a quarterly bonus tied to keeping departmental spend under a target his own boss had set. Security tooling came out of that same budget line as office snacks and the holiday party. Owen treated all 3 the same way. 11 weeks before the morning everything came apart, I filed ticket 11A7. It wasn't dramatic. I'd been doing quarterly risk reviews since I started, and this one flagged the same thing the last 4 had, in slightly more urgent language. Kessler's vault access lived on exactly one piece of hardware, owned by exactly one contractor, with no backup custodian and no shared company-held recovery key. If I got hit by a bus, got the flu, or got fired, Kessler's entire account would lock. I recommended a second hardware security module, company-owned, held under dual custody per our own compliance policy, the same policy IT security enforced for every other client account over $1 million. Cost, about $1,400 for the module, plus a few hours of setup. Owen's reply came back 9 minutes later. I remember the timestamp because I screenshotted it out of habit, the way I screenshot everything. Won't fix, budget, not needed for renewal cycle. I told myself it was nothing. Budget season does that to people. I resubmitted it in October as ticket Nugger 11204, with a cost comparison showing that a breach or lockout event would cost roughly 40 times what the module did. Owen closed that one from his phone during a meeting without a reply at all. I filed a third, number 1235, after Kessler's own IT team asked, unprompted, whether we had redundancy on their vault. I attached their email as supporting evidence. That one sat open, untouched, for 6 weeks. The first real crack showed up on a Tuesday in November when I came down with a stomach bug bad enough that I couldn't get out of bed, let alone into the office. Nothing happened, nothing dramatics anyway, but a routine reconciliation request from Kessler's Zurich office sat unanswered for 11 hours, because the one person who could unlock the vault was lying on her bathroom floor with her phone on airplane mode. Harold Ostrander, my direct VP, ended up apologizing to Zurich personally over email, calling it an isolated staffing gap, which was generous of him and also not remotely true. Owen brought it up the following Monday, at the weekly stand-up in front of the whole floor. "We had an 11-hour access delay on the Kessler account last week," he said, tapping his pen against his coffee cup. "That's the kind of single point of failure we need to be engineering out of the business going into this quarter." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. Everyone in that conference room knew exactly whose single point of failure he meant, and I felt my face go warm the way it does right before you say something you'll have to be careful about. I raised my hand and said, as evenly as I could manage, that I'd filed 3 tickets asking to fix exactly that gap, going back 11 weeks, and I could pull the numbers up right now if it would help the room. Owen's jaw tightened just slightly. "We'll take it offline," he said, which at Corbin and Wexler was a phrase that meant never. I sent him a calendar invite anyway, titled Kessler Vault Redundancy, ticket draw on 187, with the cost comparison attached as a PDF. He declined it 40 minutes later with no note. Noor caught my eye across the room afterward and mouthed, silently, 42. I told myself, again, that it was nothing. I told Baxter that too most nights while I made myself a second coffee I didn't need and stared at 3 open tickets that were quietly rotting in a queue with nobody's name on them but mine. The second crack came in December, on a call with Kessler's VP of Operations, a sharp, soft-spoken man named Anthony Reyes, who'd been running their infrastructure team for 11 years and asked better questions than most of our own compliance staff. Owen was on the call bragging, there's no gentler word for it, about how lean our security overhead was compared to competing firms, how we'd kept headcount and tooling costs down without sacrificing service. Reyes asked politely, who else on our side had emergency access to their vault if their primary contact was unavailable? Owen said without missing a beat, "We've got that fully covered," and moved on to the next slide. We did not have that covered. I had it covered personally on a plastic USB stick on a keychain that also held my apartment key. I sent Owen a memo that afternoon, laying it out in plain language, and CC'd Grace Whitfield in HR, mostly as a paper trail rather than because I expected her to do anything. Grace had been HR director at the firm for 14 years and had a reputation, correctly earned, for responding to things eventually. Owen replied to my memo with one line, "Appreciate the flag, we'll revisit next fiscal." And Grace didn't reply at all. The third crack, the one that should have scared him if he'd been paying attention, happened 2 weeks into January on a smaller account entirely, a regional pension fund with about $600,000 under management. That vault had the same dual custody setup Kessler's didn't, because the pension fund's own compliance team had insisted on it during onboarding and refused to sign otherwise. When their primary custodian, a junior analyst, not me, went out unexpectedly for a family emergency, the backup key holder stepped in without a hitch. The account never so much as flickered, and nobody outside our floor ever knew there'd been a gap at all. I forwarded the incident log to Owen the next morning with a single line of my own. This is what ticket NAR 187 would have done for Kessler. No outage, no client call, nobody notices. That's the whole ask. He marked it red and never replied. Noor added it to her list as entry 43, next to a sticky note that just said, in her handwriting, he's going to learn this the expensive way. By the 3rd week of January, the tension between us had curdled into something smaller and pettier than a real conflict, which is somehow worse. Owen started making comments about contractor spend in meetings, glancing my direction just long enough to make sure I caught it. He told me once, half joking, that I should pick my battles if I wanted my contract renewed. I filed that away too, the way I filed everything. The week before Kessler's leadership team was scheduled to fly in for their annual on-site review, a 2-day visit that would end with Owen presenting the account renewal, worth another 3 years and roughly $13 million if it went well. Owen told me directly to keep hours tight that week, since contractor overtime came out of the same line as the presentation catering budget. I didn't argue. I just kept doing my job, on schedule, the way I always had, which is why the morning it happened felt, for about 90 seconds, like the most unfair thing that had ever happened to me at that company. And then, for the rest of the day, like the most avoidable thing Owen Vance had ever done to himself. I was 6 minutes late. Not 15, not 30. 6. A jackknife delivery truck had closed 2 lanes of the Triborough approach, and I'd texted my direct supervisor, a mild, mostly absent VP named Harold Ostrander, the second I realized I wasn't going to make it by 9. I walked in at 9:06 with my badge already out, coffee in one hand, apologizing to nobody in particular, and found the entire floor unusually full, because the Kessler team had arrived early, and Owen had gathered half the department for an informal meet and greet before the real presentation started at 10. Owen was standing near the elevator bank in the good suit, the one he wore for client days, flanked by 2 people I didn't recognize yet, Anthony Reyes, and a woman I'd later learn was Kessler's general counsel. He looked at his watch, then at me, in a way that felt performed, like he'd been waiting for exactly this. "You're late," he said, loud enough to carry. 6 minutes. There was an accident on the bridge. I texted Harold. "Pack your desk before lunch," Owen said. He said it flatly, almost cheerfully, the way you'd announce a scheduling change. Then to the Kessler team, without missing a beat. "Sorry about that. We hold a pretty tight standard around here, shall we?" He walked the 2 of them toward the conference room like like nothing had happened. I stood by the elevators for maybe 4 full seconds with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't calm. My face went hot. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Somewhere behind me, I heard Grace Whitfield's office door open. Too late to matter. Here is the part Owen didn't know. Standing there in his good suit, feeling decisive in front of a client. Everything I owned that plugged into that vault was mine. My laptop, personally purchased on the approved device list under my own name. My credentials tied to my own multi-factor account. And the YubiKey, Vault Kessler 07, reimbursed to me on invoice narrated 31, 18 months ago, sitting on a company expense report with my name on the line, not a company asset tag anywhere on it. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be, walking back to my desk. Noor was already standing by hers, a stack of unread emails forgotten on her screen, watching me with an expression that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite told you so. Something closer to bracing for what came next. Priya, she said quietly, what do you need? I need you to not touch anything, I said, low enough that only she could hear. Don't fix it for him. Don't even offer. She nodded once, like she'd been waiting years for permission to say no to something at that company. I didn't go to my desk and cry, and I didn't go to my desk and argue. I went to my desk and packed exactly what was mine. My mug, a photo of Baxter, a cardigan draped over my chair since October, my laptop, and the lanyard with the YubiKey on it, which I unclipped from the desk hook and put on my own keychain, where it had always technically belonged. I left the company badge, the parking pass, and a single post-it on my monitor that said, in my own handwriting, tickets, U1187, G11204, G11235, still open. Grace found me at the elevator bank with the box on my hip. She looked, for a woman who'd spent 14 years managing every kind of workplace disaster imaginable, genuinely rattled. Priya, I need you to wait 1 second. Let me talk to— I'm not arguing with you, Grace, I said. He fired me in front of a client. That's done. I'm just leaving with what's mine. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. The doors closed on the number 958 blinking on the lobby directory clock behind her. I didn't do anything to that vault. I want that on the record before anything else because it matters and because it's true. I didn't sabotage it, wipe it, or lock anyone out on purpose. I didn't have to. Corbin and Wexler's own compliance policy, the one Owen had ignored 3 times, required that any vault lose active custodian status the instant its assigned custodian was formally off-boarded in the HR system. It was an automated safeguard, built years before I ever worked there, meant to stop exactly the kind of single point of failure risk I'd been flagging since ticket number 187. The moment Grace processed my termination in the system, which, being Grace, she did quickly and by the book, the same afternoon minute she was told to, the vault saw its custodian status change and froze itself, exactly as designed, exactly as I'd warned it would. I was standing in the lobby, waiting for a rideshare, my phone already buzzing with a confirmation text, when Owen came through the stairwell door at a dead run, no elevator, 9 flights, because he hadn't wanted to lose the seconds waiting for a car. He didn't look decisive anymore. His tie was loose. There was a sheen of sweat along his hairline, and his voice cracked slightly on my name in a way I don't think he even noticed. Priya. Priya, wait! He stopped a few feet from me, hands on his knees for a second, actually catching his breath, and when he straightened up, his eyes had the particular glassy look of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. I'm listening, I said. The vault's down. The whole Kessler presentation, everything's locked, nobody can pull the models. Reyes is sitting in there right now asking why our systems just went black mid-pitch. He said it fast, all one breath. I need the key back. You have my key, I said. I left the YubiKey stamped with the firm's own asset tag on my desk 11 months ago, when I bought it with company funds and it became a company device. That part was a lie, a small one, meant to buy 30 seconds, because I knew perfectly well what was on my own keychain. Owen didn't know the difference between an asset tag device and a personal one reimbursed on an invoice. Nobody had ever explained it to him, because he'd never once sat through the onboarding training that would have. Then whatever's on your desk isn't working, he snapped. I need the key, the one that unlocks it, now. That key, I said, is the one I packed. It's mine. It's on invoice narrated 31, dated 18 months ago, reimbursed the same week as my laptop bag. My hands, if I'm honest, were shaking a little by then too. Not from fear, but from the particular kind of adrenaline that comes from realizing in real time that you're right and someone with power over you is about to find out. If you want me to restore access, that's a conversation we have with HR and legal in the room, not in a lobby. You can't hold my client's account hostage over a staffing decision. I'm not holding anything, I said. I packed what was mine the way you told me to before lunch. You're the one who fired the only person with emergency access 10 minutes before your renewal pitch. He didn't have anything to say to that. For a second, he just stood there, breathing hard, and I watched something behind his eyes do the math on exactly how bad the next hour was going to be. It took 40 minutes to get everyone in a room, and by the time it happened, the room had a lot more people in it than Owen would have wanted. Grace Whitfield was there, notebook already out. So was David Kwan, the firm's general counsel, 12 years with Corbin and Wexler, who Grace had pulled in the second she heard the word client and locked in the same sentence from Owen's assistant. Inez Cabrera, the chief compliance officer, 9 years in the field, 6 of them here, came down from the 14th floor still holding a sandwich she hadn't finished. And because nobody had thought to close the conference conference room door fast enough. Anthony Reyes and Kessler's general counsel were both still sitting exactly where they'd been left, along with a third Kessler executive who'd flown in that morning specifically to sign a renewal. I want to say I orchestrated an audience for maximum effect. I didn't. I just answered my phone when Grace called and agreed to come back and explain the ticket history, because at that point it was the only way anyone was getting Kessler's models unlocked before the whole deal fell apart in front of the client. Inez Cabrera was the one who actually cracked the room open. She'd pulled the ticket history off the shared IT queue before she even walked in, printed it, and set it on the table in front of Owen without a word. 3 tickets, 3 timestamps, 3 one-line dismissals in Owen's own account, the last one reading, in full, won't fix, budget, not needed for renewal cycle. Dated the same week Kessler's own IT team had asked, in writing, whether the account had redundancy. Owen, Inez said, walk me through why a dual custody request for a $4.2 million account sat closed for 11 weeks. It wasn't flagged as urgent, Owen said. It was flagged 3 times, I said, as a compliance gap tied directly to your own policy on accounts over $1 million. I have the emails. Anthony Reyes, who had been quiet up to that point, finally spoke, and his voice was calm in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. I asked you directly in December, on a recorded call, whether emergency access to our vault was covered. You told me it was. I have that recording too, if it's needed. He looked around the table. I'd like to understand whether this was a security failure or a decision. Nobody answered that for a long moment. David Kwan finally did, carefully, in the flat voice lawyers use when they're already thinking about exposure. It appears to have been a decision, he said, made against 3 internal recommendations, and communicated to the client as fully mitigated when it was not. That was the sentence that changed the temperature in the room. I watched it land on Owen's face. Not shame exactly, more like the specific panic of a man watching a bonus target evaporate in real time. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow something. This is a staffing dispute, he said. It doesn't need to become, it's a documented compliance failure with a client sitting in the room, Inez said. It became that the moment the vault froze. Inez wasn't finished. She flipped to a second page in her folder, the firm's own cyber insurance policy, which she apparently kept a working copy of at her desk the way other people keep a fire extinguisher. Our carrier requires documented dual custody controls on any account over $1 million as a condition of coverage, she said. If this had gone the other way today, if Kessler's data had actually been exposed instead of just locked, we would have been filing a claim against a policy we were already out of compliance with. That's not a staffing dispute, David. That's a coverage problem. David Kwan didn't disagree. He wrote something down and underlined it twice. Walter Higgins, the senior partner who technically owned the Kessler relationship above Owen's head, arrived about 10 minutes later, having been pulled out of another meeting by a one-line text from David Kwan that apparently just said, client vault down, come now. 23 years at the firm gives you a particular kind of calm under pressure, and Walter used all of it, sitting down, folding his hands, and asking me directly, what do you need from us to restore access today? That was the question I'd been waiting for, and I answered it plainly, because I'd had 40 minutes in a lobby to think about exactly what I wanted, and revenge wasn't on the list. I need this in writing, I said. A consulting agreement, effective today, restoring me to Kessler Vault custodian under a formal contract, not an at-will handshake, with dual custody built in this time, the way Ticket 1187 asked for 11 weeks ago. I need back pay for the 2 weeks of notice I should have been given under my existing contract terms, and I need the ticket history on record as the reason for today's outage, not my commute. Walter didn't blink. Done, he said. David, draft it now, please. Grace, get me numbers. This is insane, Owen said. You're rewarding her for being right 3 times in writing, Walter said, not unkindly, and not looking at him. While you were wrong once out loud to a client. He turned back to me. Anything else? One more thing, I said. The module I asked for in Ticket 1187 costs $1,400. I'd like it ordered today, and I'd like whoever approves security tooling going forward to not be the same person whose bonus depends on not approving it. I watched Inez Cabrera almost smile. It took another hour to get the paperwork clean enough to sign, and in that hour Anthony Reyes did something I hadn't planned on and couldn't have engineered if I'd tried. He set his coffee down, looked around the table at Walter, David, and Inez, and said he wanted a full third-party security review of every account Corbin and Wexler managed for Kessler, not just the vault that had just gone dark. A formal vendor risk audit, conducted by an outside firm of Kessler's choosing, effective immediately, with the results written into the renewal terms as a condition rather than a courtesy. It's not punitive, he said, almost gently, in the tone of a man who'd clearly had this exact conversation with other vendors before. It's just what any reasonable client does after watching a $100 million relationship go dark on a Tuesday morning because a ticket sat closed for 11 weeks. We need to know this wasn't the only corner that got cut. Walter agreed before David Kwan had even finished nodding, because there wasn't another option left in the room by that point. I watched the number on that renewal, the one Owen had planned to walk out of the conference room having personally saved, the number that would have made his quarter, quietly turn into a 6-week external audit, with his name attached to every ticket the auditors would eventually pull. Inez Cabrera, to her credit, asked for the audit scope to include every account over $1 million firm-wide, not just Kessler's. While we have everyone's attention, Walter agreed to that too. Owen sat through all of it without saying another word. I signed my new contract at 1:40 that afternoon, sitting at the same conference conference table where I'd been fired 5 hours earlier. Grace slid the paperwork across, and I noticed, without saying anything, that the effective date on the back pay line used a clean number, $20,000, rounded up from what I was technically owed, which told me exactly how much appetite the firm had left for a wrongful termination conversation with its own lawyer sitting 3 feet away. I restored vault access to Vault Kessler 07 myself from my own laptop 12 minutes after signing. Reyes watched me do it. For what it's worth, he said quietly, while the models loaded back onto the screen. I don't think you should have had to fight this hard to be believed about something you already told them in writing. Neither do I said, but I've got the ticket numbers memorized now, so at least it wasn't a hard case to make. I got home that night later than I had in months, and Baxter met me at the door doing the full body wiggle he saves for days he can tell were bad ones. I sat on the kitchen floor with him for a while before I even took my coat off, and then I called my friend Talia, who'd been getting increasingly alarmed texts from me all afternoon that just said things like, fired, and then, 40 minutes later, unfired, sort of. Long story. I told her the whole thing start to finish, and she laughed so hard at the part where Owen ran down 9 flights of stairs that she had to put the phone down for a second. He ran, she kept saying, in the good suit. It was the first time all day my stomach hadn't felt like it was somewhere near my knees. By Monday, a heavily redacted version of the story had already made its way around the floor without any help from me. Nor swore she hadn't said a word, and I believed her, because half the department had watched Owen sprint through the stairwell door in real time, and none of them needed an explanation for what they'd seen. Someone posted a vague, careful line on LinkedIn about the importance of listening to your security team, tagged nobody, and got 41 comments within a day, which felt like an oddly fitting number. Owen kept his job, technically. That's the part people always want to be angrier about than I actually am. He wasn't marched out by security or frog-marched past his own reports. Corbin and Wexler doesn't work that way. Not for a regional director with 2 decades of relationships on the books. What he lost was quieter, and I think worse for a man built the way he was built. His year-end bonus, tied entirely to a budget line that had just cost the firm a 6-figure emergency contract and a client-mandated audit. His authority over vendor and security spend moved permanently to Inez Cabrera's office. And according to the floor gossip that reached me within a week, even though I no longer technically work there, his shot at the managing director title he'd been chasing for 3 years, quietly and indefinitely shelved pending the audit's outcome. The dual custody module I'd asked for 11 weeks earlier arrived by courier 4 days after the incident. Compliance now refers to the whole policy, unofficially, as the Kessler freeze. Every institutional account over $1 million gets a second hardware key and a second named custodian, no exceptions, no budget cycle appeals allowed. I went back to my desk on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later as a contracted consultant instead of an hourly vendor, with a rate that made my old one look like a joke, and a mug that said "World's Okayest Hacker" sitting exactly where I'd left it, because Grace had quietly boxed it up and kept it in her office rather than let facilities throw it out. Owen passed me in the hallway that first week back and didn't say anything at all, which was its own kind of answer. Walter Higgins stopped by my desk that same afternoon, hands in his pockets, and said the only thing anyone from leadership ever said to me about the whole mess that felt like it actually landed. Owen used to say the fix was an unnecessary expense, he told me. Turns out the unnecessary expense was pretending your warnings were. He didn't wait for me to answer. He just nodded once, like a man closing a file, and walked back toward his office, past Owen's door, which was closed, the way it stayed for most of that spring.